How do you create a successful business and a fulfilling life? In 2020, after leaving the corporate world once and for all, I founded my digital agency that replaced a six-figure income within just the first few months. Since then, I've coached thousands of entrepreneurs across the globe to do the same. Now I'm on a mission to teach others how an exceptional life is not only possible, but very achievable through entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining me, and let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. Today, we're talking about something that I feel was a really big barrier for myself when I first came into the entrepreneurial, into my entrepreneurial journey. And not because I wasn't, emulating it already, but because I had I'm going to call it a disruptive thought process around it. And for context, and you can tell by the title of this episode, what we're talking about is leadership as an entrepreneur. And for, myself, as we kind of dive into this, I think there was a lot of imposter syndrome tied around that title and that idea. So to talk about this and break down those mental barriers that you might have as an entrepreneur, I've brought in my great friend and expert in leadership, Shawn Richards. Shawn, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Hilary. You are awesome. That was a very kind introduction. You're very generous with your commentary, but very excited to be here and to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for having me on.
Yes, absolutely. I'm super excited about this. For a little bit of context, so Shawn and I have known each other for a few years now and have worked together and have had, great conversations every time we get together. But Shawn's focus is in helping to coach and train executive level individuals as well as entrepreneurs to hone their leadership skills. And through our conversations over the years, Shawn, it is so apparent that phrase leadership has so many different meanings depending on who you ask, depending on what their goals are, what their aspirations are in terms of the business that they're building and that they're creating. So before we dive into the topic and into those questions, why don't, if you wouldn't mind, just give a little bit of background in terms of your experience in this space with your company, Blue Sky Business Consulting. Just give us, the story of Shawn.
Sure. Well, if I give you the whole story, we'll be here till tomorrow. So I'll give you the abbreviated version here. I started, it's been 15, 20 years ago. I started my own entrepreneurial journey. And my own personal experience, I've done quite a bit of leadership and have quite a bit of leadership experience, but it's also become something that I've become so passionate about that I also study it as well. And have done quite a bit of research and have worked with multiple clients and have trained multiple CEOs on how to be a CEO. And it is something that has become so important because it permeates throughout the entire company. It affects everybody if there's good or sometimes not so good leadership. And leadership means, as you pointed out, Hilary, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And that's a lot of what I do is break that down and say, okay, let's define it. Let's find your leadership style, what's best for you, as well as strategically plan and organize the executive suite or the leadership team, if you will, so that we have a balance of leadership styles that will benefit the entire company and help the company move forward. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we go through the episode here, but it really is something that requires some focus, requires some intentional development and awareness about yourself as to what kind of leader are you, as well as what is needed in the company. And we can go through that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, this is something I do a lot of just general business consulting about optimization, but I really like to focus in on leadership, teams, and high performing teams and really helping the leaders and the team members move that up. So where everybody's happy, everybody is enjoying their job and having a great experience, and they're getting things done as well.
Right. Yeah. I was reading something the other day that was talking about statistics with leadership. And I mean, it's no secret. We see articles and different things all the time. I think there's even a quote or phrase that people don't leave bad jobs. They leave bad managers or bad leaders.
Right.
And so I think that especially as an entrepreneur, when you're coming into this kind of blind, right, jumping into the unknown, and even if you've had experience in leadership in the corporate setting or whatever it might be, it still has a lot of unknown around it because you're creating your thing. You
Right.
choose what it looks like. So what is your advice with that, Shawn, with individuals who are, starting to maybe build up that team? Maybe, it's them, one man show, starting out with their business, and they're starting to think about, all right, I'm going to be bringing on team members in the next 6 months or a year. How do I prepare myself for the leadership that this is going to require? What advice would you give?
Yeah, it's a great question. What happens, of course, is as the solopreneur, if it's just you, you're covering everything. So you are the leader. So certainly there's room for any kind of improvement and development just as a solopreneur. But what sometimes happens, actually more often than not, is when that solopreneur says, hey, I'm ready to scale the business. I'm excited. We need to bring in some other people so that I can go beyond just my own personal limitations as far as time and ability and whatnot. And they start to bring in other leadership. And that's where things can start to get a little bit clumsy, a little bit of a breakdown. And it starts with simple awareness of what your leadership style is. Now, I have a phrase that I use frequently when I'm working with leaders, and that is that there are as many leadership styles as there are people. Everybody needs to learn their own leadership style, but we have to start somewhere. So I've identified 4 types of leadership styles that we very generally can kind of place people into maybe a quadrant, or there's usually some overlap where there are 2 or 3 sometimes. And those 4 very simply are visionary, implementer, servant leader, and expert. And again, as a solopreneur, you're all 4. You have to be. That's just the way it is. But as you start to identify your own leadership style, that will help you to also understand, okay, when I'm looking to hire somebody, I certainly want to make sure that they have a skill set that's helpful for the company, but also what's their leadership style? If you get too many visionaries on the team, everybody's talking about great ideas, but nobody's getting things done. That implementation isn't there as well as it should be. And likewise, if you don't have somebody that's focused on the development of the team members and the employees, which is a servant leader capacity and style, then all it is getting things done, and you're kind of cracking the whip all the time, but nobody's focused on the people side of the team and the culture and the alignment with the leadership team and so on and so forth. And that's a really important part. As the company continues to expand and grow, typically the primary owner or the initial solopreneur that's now evolved, they are kind of by default the expert. But it's very common as the company continues to grow and expand for that person to do 1 of 2 things. To either say, I think I am the expert of this material because it's brand new, but it's also helpful to consider bringing in an expert in that industry if there's one that exists. If you're in a brand new industry, that's one thing. But it's helpful to bring in other people that have some expertise that can help add some additional dimension. And that doesn't always have to be a paid position either. That can be a mentor, somebody else that's already done this, or consultants or advisors. But you want to have some of that style in there that helps to lead the company in a direction that will allow it to grow unilaterally.
Yeah, that's really, really insightful. Would you mind giving, it doesn't have to be extensive, but maybe just a short description for each of those 4 types?
Yeah. A visionary is typically somebody who's got great ideas. They're very enthusiastic. They're the ones that are the cheerleaders. They are the ones that are the motivators. They've got this great vision. That's why we call them visionaries. Great vision of the company. The little bit of a drawback that sometimes happens with the visionaries is they're always coming up with great ideas, but they need someone to help channel and kind of focus and know how to implement those ideas into action. And that's where we get the implementer. So an implementer is usually really good at systems and operations and putting standard operating procedures, policies and procedures to get things done so that it's done in an efficient way, cost-effective way. And that's what an implementer does. The servant leader, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of focused on developing the people. And that's usually a position where you're working with the employees directly. So that may not be, you think of a large corporation, you're going to have somebody that's kind of responsible for employee development. But a lot of times you need somebody that's working directly with the employees. Maybe it's a team leader, something like that. Sorry about that. So that's what the servant leader is all about, is really empowering and strengthening and developing the people within the company. And then the expert has that outside expertise that's really valuable as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super helpful. And what I love that you said about that too is at the beginning, as a solopreneur, that you're really wearing the hats of each of those. And I think that's one thing that was really big for myself, is breaking the mold of what I thought it had to look like.
Right.
Versus knowing, hey, it doesn't have to be this or that. It is a this and that, and
exactly
things.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge, is that we often look at other leaders that we admire and we respect, whether they're well-known leaders of really large corporations or even just our buddies in a networking event. And we respect them and we admire them and we think, oh, in order to be an effective leader, I have to be like that person. But that's not always the best way to do that. Now, again, as a solopreneur or even in a partnership, you're going to have to play a role to a certain extent. But as you continue to expand and grow and you start to hire other executives, that's when it's really important to start taking a look at, okay, what am I good at? What's kind of my strength in leadership? And that's where I would come in as a consultant and help identify and develop that style for you. Because again, everybody has a little bit of a blend. Some people are really good at the visionary part and maybe a little bit of servant leader, or maybe they have some expertise that's really unique. And so it's not like everybody fits squarely into one of those categories. It's a blend. And that's why sometimes you're going to get a different style from one person to the next. And that's why there's so many different styles. But when we're strategic about it, and when we organize that executive team or that leadership team, that's when it can get really powerful, because you're covering all areas. And then that way, everything is getting done. That's the systems and operations. You have great vision. Everybody kind of knows what direction we're going because you've got an excited, enthusiastic leader at the top. It doesn't always have to be the CEO. You may have someone else that has more of that enthusiastic, outgoing personality that can be maybe the face of the company. But you still have someone that is covering each of those areas pretty well. And again, as you continue to really get big, it gets more and more finite at each leadership level.
Yeah, that's interesting. My question for you on this is, for those that are starting out in their entrepreneurial journey, where it is, just solo running the show, how can someone in that position be thinking about leadership, be thinking about these things? And kind of two parts on this, Shawn. One, why is that important? But two, what would you recommend in maybe, the type of work or the type of things to be building skills in when you are a solopreneur, before you're, taking that next big step into bringing team members on?
Right. That's a great question. Because a lot of people are solopreneurs, and quite frankly, they may remain that way. And so it's important. I always say it's never too early, and it's always a good practice to just have greater self-awareness. Where am I at right now? Who am I right now? What do I enjoy doing? What do I not enjoy doing? It's a common belief, especially within the leadership community, that you've got, generally speaking, you got people that really like to come up with ideas, but they hate the details. And so having that awareness about yourself is really important, and learning to develop about yourself and how to kind of manage those areas that maybe you don't like as much. Maybe you're a really good implementer, but you just kind of like to be in the details. You don't want to be the face of the company, but you really like working with the customers one-on-one, but you need somebody to kind of go out there. You can still learn how to be out there and represent your company as the solopreneur and still love the details. And then again, when the time comes, you can find somebody to come in and take that role on a more full-time basis. But with a little bit of training and some guidance, and maybe working with a consultant or an advisor of some kind, a mentor, whatever it may be, you can learn how to develop those parts of your leadership style that maybe aren't as strong. And you can focus as well on those areas that are strong and develop those. But it's really important to just get some guidance and work with somebody that can help you understand and have that awareness of where you're at right now, and then work with you to develop yourself to cover those areas that need it. But really, it'll paint a picture for you on where you want to go, and then you'll have an awareness of those areas that you'll probably need to shore up when the time comes. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of that, when we kind of get to the development, there is so much out there on developing leaders. It can get overwhelming. So of course, just like anything, just start somewhere and take small steps and take, really intentional, specific action. Learn one principle at a time, learn to implement it effectively. No one, and I mean no one, is an instant perfect leader. No one is. It takes development. It takes time. Be patient with yourself. And if you're making a sincere effort, the people that you're leading, even as a solopreneur, if you've got a small team of maybe 8 or 10 people and you're the leader, if you're making efforts to implement and to get better, they will be more patient with the times when maybe you fall a little short. And so that's really important. That's why development and ongoing development is so important.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, and that's so true. It's definitely one of those things that is like a muscle to build. It's not something that just overnight, you've got a leadership 6-pack.
Right. That's exactly right. And quite frankly, very quickly, I do work with leaders sometimes that have a bit of a, well, I've been there, done that. I know what I'm doing. And that's good. And I appreciate their confidence. And there is that expertise that is very helpful. But I'm also one that says, if you're brought into an existing leadership team and you've had some experience, there's still a level of dynamic that you have to kind of be aware of and be a little bit flexible and work with this new group. Sounds like common sense, but it's amazing how many times people come in and they've got it in their mind all figured out. They know exactly what to do, and it rattles the cage and disrupts instead of harmonizes. So there's definitely some strategy behind that.
That's a really good point. Well, and I know too that you have, and I don't want to just like put it out there because I don't know if it still exists or not, but I know that you have a framework that talks about some of those key attributes of leadership.
Yeah, I call it, sorry, go ahead.
No, take it away.
You don't mind the shameless plug here. It's called the Sapphire Leadership Development System. And Sapphire is an acronym, and it's an 8-letter word, of course, so that covers 8 areas for all leaders to learn how to develop themselves. And, we can certainly go into more time on that, but if you want, but really it's a framework that I use to help develop leaders. It's based on their strengths, and it helps them to learn some of the core attributes, but it is lengthy. It's, if I were to go exhaustingly through it, it would take 2 years to go through it because there's so much. It still feels like to me, it's scratching the surface. And that sounds overwhelming to people. It takes 2 years. Well, there's a lot of different aspects to leadership. We're never going to cover it all. But again, take that journey and start taking one step at a time and learn what it is that you need to do, what's most important for you. And that's really the key, is that we all have our little strengths and weaknesses. Build on the strengths, identify those weaknesses, and build those up. What's the biggest challenge you're facing? Find a solution, execute on the plan to solve that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, and I think too that a lot of value comes from, I think as individuals, especially as business owners, we have every intention of wanting to develop those areas, wanting to improve ourselves. But a lot of times it's not really the desire that's lacking, the desire to want to improve. It's more of just not knowing where to focus that. So that makes a lot of sense. One thing that I want to touch on, Shawn, that just kind of shifting gears a little bit here, something that you talk about a lot that I find very intriguing, that I think fits along perfectly with what we've talked about here in terms of leadership for entrepreneurs, is your thoughts around leadership and emotional well-being. Can you talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. That is such an important topic. And especially, I'm an old guy, I'm in my mid-50s. And so growing up, you didn't hear too much, a little bit. You hear about depression and anxiety, but it's reached a new height of awareness. And to be very open and transparent here, I worry a lot about a lot of business leaders, especially the solopreneurs. It's lonely at the top. We've all heard that phrase before. And what happens sometimes is this beautiful little baby we call our business, it starts to grow up a little bit and it gives us headaches. And what used to be a fun endeavor is not anymore. And there are some specific reasons for that. And I have assessments that help identify those challenging areas and how to fix those. But I worry a lot because business leaders carry a lot of stress, especially as they start to bring on employees. They feel that responsibility for their families, for their employees' families, and they want everyone to be happy and successful. And that emotional well-being can really take a hit as they're dealing with stresses. Sometimes, probably more often than we care to admit, our work-life balance, if you are the business leader, it gets out of whack. You start spending 50, 60, 70 hours at the office just trying to make ends meet, and you just can't seem to get over that hump. And that is really challenging. But it is so important to learn how to do that and how to delegate appropriately and efficiently so that you, as the business owner or leader, you have a life. Because most of us do not go into business just to work and just to make money. We want to go play with the money, basically. We want to do things with family or friends or whatever it may be. And when that work-life balance gets out of whack, that can disrupt and turn what should have been a fun endeavor into something that's not anymore. This is where I've done a lot of research, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of business leaders are dealing with burnout, and they may not even recognize it. So learning to understand what those symptoms are of perhaps some entrepreneurial burnout and how to prevent that so that you can continue to enjoy your job. And the eights even call it a job. We want it to be this fun business, but that's kind of what it becomes for a lot of people, is a job job. And that's exactly what they were trying to get out of to begin with. They didn't want a job, and then they created their own job for themselves. Right. So it is a challenge, but I worry a lot about business leaders. I want them to feel like it's not all on them. And sometimes it is helpful if you are in a solopreneur situation. It is helpful to have a mentor, an advisor, consultant, whatever it may be, to come in and just be a sounding board. I had that experience with a client a couple of years ago when I asked him, hey, if you don't mind, just give me a little bit of a testimonial here. What do you think? I was surprised when he said, sometimes it's nice just to have somebody to talk to about the business. Because sometimes we go home, we don't want to talk about it with our significant other or our spouse or whatever, or they may not be the business person, that may not be that interested in it. And so it's nice to have somebody just to talk through ideas, challenges, concerns, stresses, so that you're not carrying all of it by yourself. So emotional well-being for business leaders and entrepreneurs is really, really important.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm glad that you shared that. I won't go on too much of a tangent here, but it just reminded me too of something that I had a little bit of awareness around recently. When I left the corporate world, which I started my agency in 2020. The reasoning behind that was going through, 9 to 5 every single day. And in, a couple of instances, a couple of different experiences with different companies, realizing the emotional toll that some of the more toxic environments created.
Right.
But I had an experience a couple of weeks back that made me realize something that, so what happened, without going too much into detail, is we had a client that was with us for quite a while, for about 2.5 years, and got to a point in the relationship that it was becoming, I think, just not in alignment any longer. And made the decision to break that amicably, of course, and they went on their way. And it was probably a week or two later that I recognized such a shift in the emotional weight, or the weight of stress that I was feeling. Like, it was so relieving. And I had a moment of thinking, like, man, why am I feeling so much better all of a sudden? And I realized, like, oh yeah, I created this environment for myself without even really knowing it. And without even really being able to recognize it, because I was so close to it every single day that I couldn't see it until it was, past. So I think that that's something too, that oftentimes we, almost need an outside perspective at times to help us see, the thing right in front of us that might be causing the stress or the, the burnout, even in some cases, that we just can't see ourselves because we're so close to it.
Yeah, you really nailed it, Hilary, because what happens if you think about kind of the natural evolution of a small business, you
Mhm.
get your early clients and you love them because they're paying you, and you love them because you're excited about what you're doing. And as you continue to grow and evolve your business, it's almost inevitable that that relationship will need to come to an end,
Mhm.
because your business, you and your business are going to evolve. You're going to change. You're going to hone and polish, and your product or service offering may change a little bit. It may narrow down a little bit. You may say, you know what, we're really good at this part, but you've got what I call legacy clients that you're actually providing, in a sense, outdated services for. And I know of many consultants, and I do as well. When we come in and we start working with a client, one of the things that we do is a little bit of an evaluation or an assessment of a current status, if you will, especially if you're in the service industry and you're providing services. We evaluate. Let's do a cost analysis on what you're offering. Are you offering them at a fair price? Are you offering them, and you're evaluating the costs and the actual profitability of just that service? Who are you providing it to? And you start evaluating client by client. Is this a valuable relationship for us? Is it profitable? Is it wearing us out?
Right.
Because then you start thinking about, okay, well, and it sounds brutal, but you kind of have to go through it for your own emotional well-being. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, Hilary, because that does happen. If you're in the service industry, you may find that you've got a relationship that just kind of needs to be done and be a happy memory, and be grateful for the time that you spent together and for the help that they gave you to kind of get started. I have found a really quick tip, if I could, if you're in that situation, you kind of need to find yourself parting ways with a client. A simple phrase is something like, and you want to be truthful, of course, but it can be something like, I don't feel like we're able to provide the service that we used to be able to, or we feel like maybe there's another firm that can do a more of what you need. So can we make some introductions, and that will help you to continue to grow your business and help us to focus on what the direction we're going. And that way it feels like it's not a, hey, we don't like working with you anymore. We just don't want to be, we want to be done with you. Although I have another really quick 15-second story. I did have a client that told me that this is before they brought me on board. They had to literally tell somebody, we just can't work with you anymore. And here's why: because you're rude to our staff. And they listed exactly what the problems were. They handed it to the client and said, thank you, but we're going to part ways. And it was like a real firing of the client. But that's sometimes what you have to do. Most of the time, if it's an amicable relationship and you just kind of sense that it's starting to deteriorate, you can just do a simple, hey, I think maybe there's another firm that can help you better. And that's why it's good to have some other folks that you can pass off to when the time comes.
Yeah, that's great advice, Shawn. That's a perfect way to help that transition along. I love that. That's awesome. So kind of wrapping up a little bit here, Shawn, there's one last piece that I wanted to talk about, and it spurred because you said something in a conversation we had a few weeks ago about businesses and clients that you work with, and differentiating between, is your business thriving, or are you actually just barely staying above water? So
Right.
that topic came from, and you were kind of talking about, what is it that causes businesses to fail? So I was hoping we could expand on that just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny because there's been a lot of research about what causes them to fail. The number one reasons, I think overly simplistically put, is they run out of money. That's
Sure.
really what happens, is that something happens where they no longer have funding, or they aren't profitable anymore and they've just run out of cash. That's really what ends up driving the business out. But there are a lot of other factors that will lead up to that. Where there isn't as much research is into those businesses that survive. So if you think about kind of a spectrum, you've got the companies that are dying, they're just headed towards a closure at some point. Then you've got that, well, if I were to go to the other section, the other end of it, they're thriving, they're doing really well, everybody's happy. And then you've got that midsection. And those are the ones that are just hanging on. Those are the surviving businesses. Sadly, those are the ones that are really, they're the ones that are kind of dealing with the growth issues, the stress, the emotional well-being. And so I developed an assessment to help business leaders kind of determine, where are you at on this spectrum?
Hmm.
And what specifically are the things that are causing you the most stress? And then how do we create a plan to solve those and kind of get you moving from either dying to surviving, and then from surviving to thriving? Because I mean, there are literally dozens of reasons why a business might eventually go out. Even company culture can really take a toll if business leaders aren't leading properly. The employees aren't happy, so they don't do good work, and the turnover is really high. That can also lead to customers not being happy. If they get a sense that the company they're working with doesn't have good company culture, they may not want to work with them because all the employees are grumpy all the time. So every interaction they have is really negative, and that can affect the success of the business. So there are a lot of reasons why businesses will fail. And boy, everything from inventory and project management, there's a lot of elements to it. It kind of depends on the industry that you're in. Service industry is one that can really do well and it can be easily managed because there's usually a low cost. You don't have inventory and those kinds of things. So those have a lot of chance for success. It can also be really competitive. And so you have to find a way to distinguish yourself and also reinvent yourself. That's one of the other things that a service industry will run into, especially in this day and age where there's so much worldwide competition. Because when you're in the service industry, you can do a lot of things remotely, and the pandemic kind of revealed that. And now we have a lot of folks that you can go anywhere. It's not just in your local community. You can go almost anywhere in the world and get help with what you need. So it can be really competitive. But if you learn how to really get focused on what it is that you want to offer and the people you want to work with, and be willing to monitor your industry and keep reinventing yourself, keep creating, keep coming up with new things, new services that you can offer that stay within your aligned vision and values and mission statement, but be a creator. That would probably be the biggest thing I can suggest for survival and into the thriving mode on that spectrum, is to be a creator and an innovator.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so true. The things that you're explaining there, I mean, in the agency world as a marketer. So, I mean, we're in April of 2024 right now. And if I think about just the last 6 months, there have been drastic changes to Google and SEO and Facebook for ads and, lots of different things that you're exactly right. You've got to pivot, but also I think with that, it's not just pivoting, it's learning to be creative with that and really, leveraging your uniqueness to stand apart from the crowd.
Very well said. Yeah, there's a lot to it. And you said something a little bit ago that I think is worth repeating and bringing to the surface again. Sometimes we're so close to the business, we don't often take an objective look at it, and we need to. And that's where bringing in an outside consultant can be really, really helpful, because they'll come in with some objectivity. That doesn't mean that you cut off all the old folks or give up on services that you really like to offer or products that you like to sell, whatever it is. But it does, hey, let's bring in some objectivity here and really assess where we're at. Because you're right, sometimes we're so close to it, we don't think creatively, and that's where some outside help can really be beneficial.
Right. Well, Shawn, thank you so much for sharing your insight on these different topics and these different questions. I can tell this every single conversation that we have together, that this is very apparent that it is your passion, to help those that you work with in this space. For those that are listening, where can they connect with you? And where's the best place to maybe learn a little bit more about what it is that you do? And before you share that, I do have to say as well, guys, for those that are listening, Shawn has been so generous in offering to, if you've listened to this episode, to provide a 15-minute free consult with you. Just provide some advice, some suggestions, different things like that. So that link will be in the show notes here. But Shawn, for those that want to maybe, connect with you outside of that, learn a little bit more about what it is that you do, where can they find you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me on, by the way. I always enjoy these conversations. You can find me on LinkedIn, Shawn, SHAWN, and then J Richards is the handle or whatever they call it there, the extension on LinkedIn, whatever. You can tell I'm not real savvy with this kind of stuff. My website is Blue Sky Biz Consulting. So Blue Sky Biz, B-I-Z consulting.com. And I'm always happy, as Hilary mentioned, always happy to take a 15-minute discussion, especially for listeners to Hilary. Any friend of Hilary is a friend of mine. That's how I look at it. And always happy to talk and take a few minutes and just share with me kind of your biggest challenge. And let's see if we can find some solutions for you that'll help you really quickly. And then we can take it from there if it makes sense to do so.
Awesome. Well, Shawn, thank you so much. I appreciate it.